Hello everybody, Paul here again. We've got another live stream today. I'm driving Sector 3 Studios RaceRoom Racing Experience. I've got Alex Hodgkinson who joined us for the recent GT3 stream. Alex is the Sector 3 Studios physics guru. Alex, want to say hi?
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in.
Good. The reason we're here today with Alex, with Sector 3 and RaceRoom, is we're taking the upcoming Porsche DLC out for a test drive. We're at Nürburgring Show. There's 3 cars from the DLC. Porsche Cayman Gt4 Clubsport, the Porsche 911 GT3 Cup, and the Porsche 911 GT3R. We're going to have a bit of time with all 3 cars. We're going to talk about them, talk about physics, talk about the sim. Have a bit of fun, really. There's a few guys joining us on server, so thank you to everybody who's made it today. And yeah, Alex, while I exit the pit lane in the Cayman, do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction to this small but rather beastly machine?
So, yeah, the Cayman Gt4 Clubsport. Interesting that it's called the GT4, but actually, this Clubsport isn't a GT4 car. It's a track car special. And a sort of cup class race car that Porsche have put out, but in a strange detail, it doesn't actually meet the GT4 regulations.
Okay.
It's raced over in Germany in the VLN, so we've used that as a reference, and a lot of our feedback and a lot of the development that we've done has been with a few drivers that race over in Germany in the VLN. And to just sort of give a few specs about the car, horsepower's 385 horsepower. It's the weight I can't remember off the top of my head actually right now.
The pressure's alive.
It shares a it shares a lot of parts from the GT3 Cup car. So front suspension, rear suspension, brakes are basically the same as the GT3 Cup car. Tyres are a lot smaller. It's a little bit heavier than the Cup car, actually, than the GT3 Cup car. It hasn't got quite so much power. A really big difference is the downforce isn't there. It doesn't have anything like as much downforce as the GT3 Cup or a full-on GT3 car, and not as much downforce as a GT4 car. And those people that have been driving the GT3 cars that we've released recently will also notice that the tyre grip isn't as much as those GT3s.
I very much noticed that already. It's a difficult little beast to drive, isn't it? It
is indeed. It's a car that's, even though it's a beginner class car, really, in the way that it's sort of aimed, it is quite particular in the way that it's driven. It's got traction control and it's got ABS, but it sort of runs quite a fine line between gripping and not. And there are a few things that we'll talk through as you drive it that I'll give as pointers, sort of as we go along. So other things about it that are nice to know: the gearbox is the 6-speed PDK gearbox, which is flappy paddle. And those people that are fans of the road car will know that definitely in the UK market you can't get a 6-speed PDK. It's only a manual in the UK market. That's all.
Oh, no, that's something actually I didn't really know. So is this, obviously this is the standard spec that they use at VLN.
Yeah.
How long has this car been out in production in the real world?
So this current model was launched at the start of, I think I'm right in saying the start of last year. So it's raced this year and a bit of last year. And the Cup series is really well supported. From sort of browsing through results, they're generally between 10 and 15 of these cars are racing out in the VLN, so it's pretty hotly contested, yeah.
So this one then that we've got in RaceRoom, or that we're getting in RaceRoom, sorry, this is the latest model. Whoa! Nearly. It's very flighty on back. This is the latest model that's racing at the moment then?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as a beginner car, as a beginner club class car, most of the setup is fixed. The springs are basically fixed. The springs are fixed. Anti-roll bars, there's a little bit of adjustment in there. There's no downforce adjustment. The wing is a fixed item. So really all you've got to play with is the brake bias, but even that you can't play with when you're on track. That's a garage only setting.
I wondered about that, if that was something I'd set wrong in my settings, to try to wind a little bit of front bias on, and then nothing was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, you're quite limited to what you can do with a setup, which is great, really, for what we're doing. I've noticed a few times a little bit of snappy oversteer. So the key feature of this, the driving characteristic that everyone's got to get the head around, is that lift off oversteer is a feature, quite a significant feature in certain conditions. So you've got to drive this almost as though it's like a front wheel drive car. So minimize time off throttle. It really doesn't like coasting up to the apex. It's very much a case of like slow in, get the braking done mostly in a straight line, and just really get on the power and use the throttle to balance it all the way around those turns, especially the long ones.
Well, that's actually a really interesting point. Did a little, whoa, here we go, and I'm off.
I think that Porsche, the collaboration that I've got has been really, really good. But of course, it comes on all levels. So Porsche, with regards to, let's start for something that's nothing to do with me. 3D models of these cars are. This is absolutely like, this isn't sort of our interpretation of how it should sort of look. This is signed off by Porsche. This is Porsche have been over this and really looked at it and said, oh no, that bit's missing. That bit's not quite right. And this is absolutely how Porsche want it to look. This is the way. You know, as much as if you look at the front of the car, the tow hoop that's there on the front of the car, that's how Porsche wanted it to be. And we could have sort of tidied it away, and that's a little like a canvas tow hoop that sticks out of a hole on the bodywork. We sort of had a little bit of to and fro, and eventually they signed it off and said, yeah, you can make it look like that. That's okay. But yeah, Porsche have really collaborated on all sorts of levels. But with regards to the physics, they have basically just supplied us with everything that we need to know. There's actually, you can learn quite a lot about the physics from the 3D models, which is interesting.
That's interesting, yeah.
So the actual suspension geometry that's gone into this has been derived from that. So, you know, the suspension points are as the suspension points should be, because that's what our 3D model says.
That's actually quite incredible that you can get to that level of detail from something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are definitely periods in my life earlier on, years ago, where I wish I could actually have done that myself, just to work out car setup and stuff, because you're a step ahead when you can actually 3D model it and you can simulate it. So yeah, that's how we've done it. And you can see as well in this, it's nice to just watch the cars on track, because you can see the way that the car rolls around the turns and the weight transfer is all there, and it's all doing the right sort of thing.
Yeah, that's. Would you say then, just to go back a moment to like the collaboration with Porsche and how things have worked, have they been one of the more forthcoming manufacturers that you've worked with in terms of data and doing what they do to get a good representation of their cars in the sim?
Honestly, everyone's very good. Is my experience thus far. Everyone is very, very good. So I'd say that, you know, Porsche sort of right up there. Generally from RaceRoom, we only go into something if we know that we can make it as we want it to be. So if we're getting sort of lukewarm responses and stuff, we don't really tend to go there.
Oh, so that's interesting then. So the Cayman GT4 just to go back to the Cayman Gt4 Clubsport, it's obviously the very first time that a GT4 spec car has been in RaceRoom. You've obviously got a massive quantity of GT3 machines. Has that presented any interesting differences to you from a physics point of view compared to the other kinds of cars that you have in the sim?
Yeah, I mean, it's massively different from the GT3, because the GT3 is typically at speed, say 250 kilometers an hour. Some of those GT3s have got 1,000 kilograms of downforce. So, wow, you know, they could almost drive upside down at that sort of speed. But this Cayman has something around, I struggle off the top of my head again there, it's something around about 80 to 100 kilos of downforce at that sort of speed.
Good God.
So you can see straight away that's a massive difference. And with the differential not being so sophisticated, it's just quite a different thing. Actually, the car that's been the biggest struggle to really get a head around has been the Carrera Cup, but we'll move on to that later. But this Cayman's it's been a very enjoyable thing to get it right, and we've really spent a lot of time. And I can see a lot fewer cars flying off the track now, so that's good. So obviously, at a certain point, it does click.
Yeah, I must admit, having now sort of like done 5 or 6 laps in it or whatever, tyres have warmed up, got a bit used to the car. It is a car that does reward consistency and hitting your markers, hitting your points, a lot more than some of the other cars in the sim, doesn't it?
It's very much about being smooth, and as soon as you try to sort of grab it by the scruff of the neck and tell it what's for, it really doesn't want to know about it. It'll try to have you off. So I can just see all those cars that are going well nicely out there now are just being driven really smoothly, and everyone's thinking about just balancing that throttle and really trying not to stay out of it for too long. And you can just see it all coming along there nicely. It's it's a rewarding car.
So how long then? How long traditionally does something like this take you from kind of point of conception and a first basic model in game to getting a finished product? What sort of lead time for a car of this kind in RaceRoom? Especially considering you've managed to get such good access to all the data and everything. We're going to drop my my visual and just continue talking through TeamSpeak and on stream. So sorry people, I'm afraid you're not going to have the pleasure of looking at my shirts. Or frustrated, frowning, concentrated face. Anyway, go on, Alex, carry on. What was?
Yeah, so right, I was talking inertias. So the inertias, I'm adamant that inertias they are really well. They play a really, really big part in how the car behaves. So, for example, I know the wheel weights on this Cayman, a full on just wheel assembly is 11.4 kilos at the back and about 10.2 at the front. And now if I changed that and I halved that, the car would be completely different and the dampers wouldn't work properly, and the thing would be very, very different over the curbs and just wouldn't be right. So it's sort of fleshing it out is what really takes a long time. So initially, I could put together a general idea of the car in probably a couple of days, but then to actually get it right, and by the time that we've done the research and it's been back and forth with drivers, it's 3 to 4 weeks really. And that's sort of if I wasn't doing anything else. But of course, this car's been in development whilst the GT3s were all being developed as well.
Yeah, which is obviously going to stretch it out quite a bit longer as you split your time between the three.
And interestingly, what you learn with one car, it's always a learning curve. What you learn with one car, I'm always find myself going back to the other one and then applying it to that one as well. So all the time there's this sort of like, oh, let's just make that a bit better, and then I've learned that, so I can apply that to there. And then there's this sort of like a pepper pot effect of something gets learnt there and applied there, and something gets learnt there and applied there, and it just gradually sort of creeps itself forwards.
And of course, that's magnified as well, I would imagine, by the fact that you're still relatively new into RaceRoom and learning the ins and outs of what the software can and can't do and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've started to sort of tap shoulders now with programmers and say, oh, I've got this idea. What do you think about if we implement that? And now, actually, nothing that you guys have got now has. That I'm talking about with regards to programming has come through, but there are a few little features that I know, a few little things that I'm used to from my previous job instructing, and time that I spent with these cars, certain ways that they behave and certain sort of features in them that we're going to bring through just to sort of
that's cool.
add a bit of a depth to it, which is not necessarily something physics related. It's just user related more than anything.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice thing to know, that sort of real world experience in these cars is then feeding into the software, and obviously the end result that we're all feeling when we take the cars out on track.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really like to talk about it right now, but I'm biting my tongue.
Yeah, I can imagine JF sat there now with a bit of a sweat on going, no, 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 no. We've been there before talking about features that are not ready. So, Paul, as we say earlier, there's 3 cars coming out on this DLC in the very, very near future. See, I didn't say soon. I like that. Didn't say soon. Didn't fall into that trap.
Well done. Well
Thank
done.
you very much. Thank you very much. There's 9, I think. We initially we understood when the license were announced that's coming.
That's
so
right.
This first 3 will form a DLC pack of their own, or will they be sold separately? How's it working store-wise for these?
I don't actually know the details of that. I can't give you the answer there. I'm sorry.
Nah, it's all right. I'll let you off. You keep making the physics. Somebody else will do the selling part of things.
It's very rare that I get let out of my dark room. So,
So out of these 3 then, the 911 GT3 Cup, the 911 GT3R, and then this Cayman Gt4 that we're in, what's been your personal favourite to work on? And why?
ooh. I think the one in the middle, Cup car, has been my favourite to work on because it's offered so many challenges. It's such a, from a physics point of view, it's such a sensitive car. I don't mean that anyone's going to get in it and drive it and think, wow, this is too sensitive. It's very sensitive in terms of, if I change the damper setting 1 click, which are actually fixed as far as the driver's concerned, it would make such a big difference to the car. It's really, really hard to find a sweet spot, and it's been really interesting to find out why as well. So yeah, and also that Cup car is quite closely related to the GT3R, because the GT3R is actually really like based on the Cup car. So certain elements are carried across, like the actual suspension layout and the wishbones and where the arms connect to the wheels and connect to the chassis are the same on both cars. So that's been quite an interesting thing, to take one Cup car, which is relatively low downforce, just with a wing on the back, and then transfer that across to something that had, its weight in downforce particularly, and work out the challenges around that. So between those 2 cars, there's been quite a feed of sort of data and a transfer of, if I do this to that one, I've got to do it to that one as well. And it's been a really interesting learning curve. And actually, the Cup car is the one that I've worked on the longest. So when I actually started at RaceRoom, that's been sort of tinkered at for 5 months now.
Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, that's will be about right, because I got an opportunity to drive it at the Sim Racing Expo back in September, I think it was. A very early version of it at RaceRoom Cafe, and I remember that was the first time I'd had an opportunity to get behind the wheel of a piece of work that you've produced, and I just remember being blown away by how very much more alive the car felt compared to the stuff that we've had up to this point.
Yeah, and that comes back to that inertia stuff. Another interesting thing was to dig up and realise a few features that have been sort of dormant in RaceRoom. So, for example, tyre warmers aren't allowed in the GT3 Cup. So the tyres, as you sat in the pit lane with the car, the tyres start at sort of ambient temperature, about 30 degrees. So you're looking at a good 2 laps before you've actually got real tyre temperature. So that's another element that just got thrown in there. Whereas this GT4 and the GT3s are all allowed tyre warmers. So there's not, obviously after a few laps, the tyre temperatures sort of settle down and balance out. So the balance changes a little bit. But the Cup car starts with cold tyres. So that's quite an interesting thing as well. And with everyone that's going to be, really, our customers are so used to having traction control, nice warm tyres, ABS, to jump in the Cup car, it's quite a different thing. It's quite a culture shock, really, in a way, which has been which has been great because I really wanted to sort of shake it up a bit.
And actually, I can tell very much the case with that one. When I was doing a little bit of testing last night, I drove the GT3R. I wish they wouldn't call them the same name. That really is awkward. They drove GT3R, and obviously that's got all mod cons, ABS, traction control, everything. Really, really sorted, settled car. And kind of I jumped in the cup, assuming I'd have much of the same business, and a hell of a lot of tyre smoke and a big trailing black line into turn one later, you very quickly realise that there's a lot of modulation of brake pedal is required on that one. And sort of, I found as well that... Sorry, I just pirouetted. I found as well that GT3 Cup, there's a lot you can do with a brake to help pivot the car in the Cup. To help pivot the car in the corner, and that's a nice experience and something I really enjoy.
Yeah, it was quite interesting actually. So, as I said, the first car that I started to work on was that GT3 Cup, and I went through and I did the maths, and I said, well, this is like that, and it's got this little downforce, and that's how powerful the brakes are, and I just worked it out, and I put it on the car and sort of shared it around internally. And some of the guys came back and said, "Oh, I can't stop locking the brakes up." So, to which I then turned to one of the current drivers, the guy that was racing in Cup Germany this year, and just said, let's just do an online session and let's all get in it, and we'll just talk about certain features of it. And I sort of kept it as a quote. He said, yeah, you sometimes in certain conditions you just look at the brake pedal and it locks up. It's so I thought, well, that's kind of what the maths had said, so it must be somewhere around the right kind of track. It's amazing. These cars are really different for saying how many bits they share. They're completely different to each other.
Well, I think we've kind of started to talk about the 911 GT3 Cup, so let's finish this lap, bring her into the pits, and go out and give it a whirl.
So how are lap times looking? Who's leading? Are you up there?
No. I'm 2 seconds off K.
Okay.
I will argue that's because I'm talking.
Yeah, of course.
Actually, interesting point, and also I'm rubbish, that doesn't help. What are these cars like, lap time wise, in comparison to their real world counterparts?
So at the Nürburgring, which has been our benchmark, our VLN driver is within about a second of his actual lap times.
Wow, cool. That's actually pretty incredible. And of course, Nürburgring is laser scanned in RaceRoom, so that's a good representation of the track as well.
Absolutely, and it's so long as well. So, you know, if we talk about a lap that was say 1 minute 30 by comparison, this sort of it's like being within a few tenths on a shorter track.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible actually.
Which has made us very happy.
That must be quite a satisfying feeling though for you to go from the data and the CAD models and the drawings and all that lot, and then to turn something out that is so close to the real world thing.
Yeah, and actually give it to someone that's actually racing it this year and say, "Go on, what do you think of that? Give us some feedback," and actually go and do some qualifying laps and tell us what it's like. And he comes back and says, "Yeah, well, let's just stiffen up the dampers a little bit at the back, and all my corner speeds match. I reckon that'll be about it." So, and it's at that point really that we go, right, let's not touch anything else.
Exactly, absolutely. I mean, talking actually about matching to real world, do you find, what's the feedback like from the drivers in terms of, in a real car I'll come into this corner and I'll get a bit of oversteer, do they find similar behaviours in a real car in comparison to your virtual one?
Yeah, so particularly with this Cayman, the big bit of feedback, or the big character of the car, was that the lift-off oversteer is quite a feature, and the car it doesn't like to slide. It grips and then it doesn't grip. It doesn't like to slide. So that those two things are really like what I feel we've accomplished with it. So that's been great. Really, really good.
Well, I'm just coming out of the pits now, and I mean immediately, it's noticeable how much more punch this thing's got than the Cayman. Which is really, wow, it's really noticeable actually. The sounds, once again, are absolutely exceptional.
Yeah, so moving across to this, got obviously a much bigger wing on the back, which is actually, from a physics point of view, it's been quite a problem sort of justifying it mathematically, because that wing lifts up the front end, and there are no two ways about it. So in fact, we've got data from a Carrera Cup car which was put in a wind tunnel. That's where the aero's based on.
This cool. That is interesting. Is that from many national series that run Carrera Cup?
Yeah, well, actually, this year, this model car was only running the Porsche Super Cup and the Porsche Carrera Cup Germany. So this is the 2017 model. Next year, this is going to be adopted by the other national series. But yeah, this year this has only been Super Cup, so supporting the F1 races, and Carrera Cup Germany, and it just so happens we have most of those tracks from Carrera Cup Germany, nicely. So we've got loads of references, and we've been able to compare lap times and make sure that apex speeds and top speeds and that sort of thing all matched. So straight away you notice that this car is really different to that. The Cayman that you've just driven. Power-wise, it's got about 100 horsepower more. Its weight's fairly similar, but the position of the weight's quite different. Whereas the Cayman has got about 45% of the weight on the front wheels. This Porsche's got 62% of the weight on the back wheels. So it's so only 38% up front, so it's quite sort of squatty. It's like all the weight's at the back, and it really feels like it. I think you notice just as you turn into a corner, you can feel that the car's actually really pivoting from like behind the driver. It's not at the driver's hips. It's somewhere right at the back, and that's really what you've got to sort of get your head around, because you've got the downforce, which is levering up the front end. So at speed, it can get quite light at the front. You have to just find a certain way of leading into quick corners. But on the other hand, with the weight being at the back, it's got really, really good traction. It's the best thing about it is that when you get on the gas, the back end squats down. It just grips and goes.
And actually, talking of sort of weight being at the back, something that's quite noticeable almost immediately when driving this, and it's something I've not seen much of in sim at the moment, is how the front end bounces a lot. When you ask a little bit too much of it, she seems to just lift up a little bit, and you can feel the front wheels skidding across tarmac as it's wanting to push away from apexes, which I'm nowhere near apexes, so that's not really relevant to me. But that's interesting. That's something I've not felt before, particularly in R3E.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting actually. If you have ever seen, I don't know, have you ever seen Carrera Cups race in person?
I most certainly have.
But if you stand on the corner, stand on the inside of a corner, you notice that sometimes they lift up the inside front wheel, and it's not uncommon for them to do it. And actually, in certain conditions and in certain turns, our cars are doing it as well, which is really nice. It shows that we're along the right lines and we're really doing the right sort of thing. So it really unloads that front inside tyre, which is nice as a feature, but it's actually really quite hard sometimes to get your head around it, because that tyre that's lifted up in the wheel, it's not giving you any grip, and you certainly can't do any braking with it. So it's a car that seems to really actually reward doing quite a lot of braking in a straight line, and then just the tiniest little bit of trail braking to make the weight sit forwards. It does respond quite well to, but it really doesn't like medium to hard braking into turns. It will just lock up quite ferociously.
Yeah, I'm slowly coming to discover that, I must admit. Although, when the tyres come in after a lap or two, the car really does settle down, and this one feels like, despite its performance, a fairly beginner's friendly car.
Yeah, which is actually quite surprising when you compare it to the Cayman, isn't it? It's,
yeah, very much so.
So, so it's a nice car, and again, if we look at the car setups, you'll see that it's basically it's a fixed setup again. Wings adjustable, toes adjustable, camber's adjustable, but the camber's generally maxed out anyway, and that's maxed out because that's how the real cars are run. So that's how our car is. Wing gears, I have actually made these setups in the same way that the GT3, all of the GT3 fast cars are. The setup's just a little bit safe and a little bit understeery.
Yeah.
Quite easy to dial it out. You just maybe make the back tyres a little bit more parallel, a little bit less toe in, and take a little bit of wing off, and then you'd be more towards neutral and oversteery. But of course, with it being rear engine, it can be a bit of a pendulum. So if you are the sort of driver that will encourage this sort of car to oversteer, it will most likely just keep going and send you off the track backwards.
And again, with this one, have you had some input from real-world drivers, and sort of how helpful have they been in the development process as you've sort of brought it to life over the last 5 months? Did we say earlier?
Yeah, about 5 months. Yeah, so yeah, very helpful again. So we've had everything from sessions with drivers. We've got data captured from race teams. We've got some onboard videos which have had to sign our life away in order to receive them, and we've run those online sessions, as I said, which are always probably the most helpful thing, because we can just really tune in or tune out certain behaviours.
I've always been intrigued when you speak of these online sessions and real world drivers and whatnot. Do you find they try and drive the car like their real one and make you adjust the game to suit, or do they put I don't know how to put it really, a sort of gamey mentality to it and kind of forget the rules of safety and not throwing the car off? Are they pretty good when they get into
they tend to be really pretty good, actually. It's quite impressive viewing, because we can have guys and maybe do 4 hours of driving, and there will not be a foot wrong. It will literally be, it'll be a 4-hour stint at Le Mans as far as they're concerned. It's real and it's driven. There's no curb abuse. There's no sort of corner cutting, and even to the point that some of the guys don't even like to hit escape out on track. They like to just come in the pit lane and stop, just because that's what they do in real life. So that's what they do in the game. You said before about the bouncing of the car. Now, this has taken me a while to really get my head around why, and I've still not entirely decided why. But this is a really stiff car, really, really stiffly sprung, and it's because that's how it is. All our data, all our numbers, and all the spring rates that we've got say that's how it is. So that's how it is in game. But it's actually stiffer than a GT3 class car.
Oh really? Now that I would not have expected. I thought this would have been a lot softer before taking it out on track, just to make it a little bit more compliant for the gentleman driver side of things.
You really think so, but amazingly, that's how it is. So, but on the flip side of it, it doesn't sort of behave like it's really too stiff. It's still quite compliant, but it just happens to be very, very stiff, and that's where that bouncing comes from. And if anyone has seen these Porsches out on track, front end bounce and lifting an inside front wheel is a feature, and that's something that typically you see all the time with Porsches on track. So it's really nice that we're doing it as well. It's great to be able to see that the car's behaving properly and as it should.
And I must admit, I really like this front end bump. Bird really nicely through force feedback, and it just adds another layer, another dimension, a sort of feel and engagement with it that's there with some of the other cars. And I must admit, I think this is possibly, out of the three, my favourite to drive, and it's got online legend written all over it. This is going to be popular on servers, I'm certain of it.
So I also spent a bit of time, and it was actually even a bit of a last minute for the head scratching session about the force feedback, because I'd made a few changes and I was looking at the geometry of the cars, and it actually turned out that I'd misread some numbers of a real car. But now they're correct. The force feedback is actually it's done in terms of the suspension setup. It's done in quite a different way. So the suspension and the force feedback. I know everyone was very happy with how they came out with the GT3 class cars, but this should be, all three of these should be a step forward. And interestingly, the driver should be able to notice that there's a difference in the force feedback between these three cars. And the reason is they all run different size front tyres. So the GT4 narrower, cup car a bit bigger, the full GT3 class car big huge front tyres, and a bigger tyre takes more effort to turn. So that is showing through in the force feedback, and you should actually really be able to compare that the Cayman really, in terms of steering feel, is quite a lot like a road car. GT3 Cup has got big fat tyres really, so it feels heavier, and then when you get to the GT3 class car, it's got bigger tyres still, so the force feedback is really quite a different thing again. So it's tiered, and that's not a fudge factor, that's simply because it's responding to how the tyre size is and how the suspension setup is.
Well, that leads me on to an interesting point. You sort of alluded to it earlier about wheel weights and various different... What kind of... For those of us that don't know much about modding or physics development or whatever, what kind of level of detail do you go to with these cars? I mean, it kind of surprised me a little bit when you mentioned that you were looking for the actual weight of the brake unit. How far deep, how far down do you go with getting weights and sizes and placements of the finer parts of the car?
So initially, the very first thing that I did just to find a starting point was I took my own race car to pieces and weighed certain parts of it. So and I honestly did that. I took wheels and I weighed them, and I took tyres and I weighed them, and I weighed brake discs, and that was the beginning of a table. And I've now got a spreadsheet that's got literally hundreds of weights of different tyres and wheels and brake disc weights, just so I can go straight to it. But it's been quite hard to get hold of, actually, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, everything goes in, like the weight of the drive shafts of the car are a factor. Some of these cars have got carbon fibre doors instead of steel. That makes a difference, you know, that's factored in. So yeah, I mean, if we had two cars that were identical in every way, apart from one had carbon fibre doors and one had steel doors, I could make it different, and I could make those inertia differences and those weight differences sort of actually apply to the driver, so the driver should be able to notice in the sim that something's different.
I mean, that's
so it really
goes
down to those details, yeah.
Do you have where the fuel cell lays and the difference it makes with how much fuel you've got in the car and the weight in it and that kind of thing as well?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that's interesting and worth mentioning actually with these. So all three of these Porsches have got their fuel tanks at the front. So the weight of being at the front means that the balance potentially in terms of lap times might change in a different way to some of the other cars that people would have been driving. So I'm not going to give it away how it changes and what's different, but it's worth noting that if someone were to buy the GT3R, on face value, just in terms of pure lap times, it might be X amount different to say the Corvette or the Callaway C7, but over a stint there might be a whole different picture emerging. So there's a whole other element that needs to be explored. It's not just terms of lap times, and the way that these cup cars are quite interesting as well, because obviously everyone's in the same boat, everyone's racing a cup car, but if the weight's going off the front axle, then something's going to happen in terms of the balance. So the driver just has to set up the car in a certain way to maybe account for that happening at the end of the race. So there's strategy in there as well. It's not just lap times that are important. It's there's a bit of thinking to be done in the background as well.
Which of course has always been a famous thing with Porsche, that they are a stint car and they excel on certain circuits, and maybe drop back a little bit on different ones, and that's going to make an interesting added element to the longer distance online events and leagues and whatnot. I assume then, I'm talking specifically in the GT3 terms, that we've had a balance of performance has been undertaken here to match it up reasonably well with the other GT3 contenders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone will find it's quite different. I think it's really going to be quite a fan favourite, to be honest. My personal choice out of the GT3 class cars are it's between the C7 and the Porsche. Those are the two that I really enjoy the most myself. But yeah, we've balanced it again. We've balanced it on a number of circuits. The Porsche has been balanced to match to the car, so people will be pleased to know, those that have spent time setting up the cars, that they haven't been touched. They're as they were. Apart actually from the Alpina, because apparently that was a little bit fast, so we've dropped the power back a little bit on that. But yeah, so the balance of performance, it fits in quite nicely. It just hits a nice little sweet spot.
Excellent. Still keeping with well, we'll change cars very shortly, but staying with this GT3 Cup. Hang on a second. Sorry, I just almost locked up and went off circuit then. It's a standalone Cup car, so it races nationally and internationally in different series. Will this thing be coming with a whole bunch of different liveries and whatnot, and will it be sitting in its own class within RaceRoom, or will this particular one be absorbed into an existing or new class?
So this is going to be in its own standalone class. You can see a good selection of liveries that we've already got out there. Eventually there are going to be more, but I can't really say very much more than that.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, it's going to be a standalone class. So there are plenty of liveries. I've not actually counted up how many that we've got, but there's lots to get stuck into. So yeah, it's a case of just racing these against others of the same.
Because really, I want to swap onto the next car, but I'm 1,000 slower than JF, and I refuse to be beaten, and it's really frustrating. Oh no, I'll come into the pits and we'll swap over. We'll try out the big boy, the GT3, 911 GT3R.
Quite interestingly, actually, it's a bit Marmite in terms of brakes. So actually, to those European and non-English listeners, that probably means nothing. Marmite, you love it or you hate it. Yeah, so some people have got in and really found that they can't get on with the brakes, but actually I've noticed that nobody really seems to be having very many problems, which is nice. Those people that are eagle-eyed will notice straight away in the garage that we've actually set the default brake bias to 90%, not 95 as it usually is with the other cars. That's just to soften it a bit, so it's a little bit more user-friendly initially. But in order to get realistic braking distances, you'd up that up to about 95.
Is this the Cup or the GT3 that you're
That's
referring to? Yeah, because I noticed coming from off the back of obviously driving the Cayman, then jumping straight into this, first 2 or 3 laps, absolute disaster for me, locking up all the time, and you almost feel as though you don't know what to do to stop it happening. But as you get into a groove, it's a car that really rewards getting under its skin and getting into a rhythm, isn't it?
Yeah, so with it not having ABS, that's quite a challenge. Very much down force. That's the challenge as well, to the full brake pressure. And when I say gradually, we're only talking over 1/10 of a second. You just gradually ease it in. The difference between trying to push something on the floor and kicking it. So it's really just gradual ease onto the brake pedal, and that will really reward that will.
Well, I'm now just coming out of the pits in the 911 GT3.
Look at that.
Yeah, she's a beauty. Very similar kind of feeling, but this one feels a little bit more responsive to everything I wanted to do. I'm immediately noticing, second I do 1, 2, 3 degrees a turn, she's straight there. She's wanting to follow my commands, almost on demand.
So we've got pretty similar power actually to the Cup car that we've just driven. We've got a lot more downforce. We've got way more downforce. That huge wing on the back really works, but the big thing that's working with this is the underfloor and all the ground effects. They're really, these GT3 cars really are true ground effects cars nowadays. It's got traction control. It's got ABS, which is going to be familiar to people. It's also, as a default setup, it's got much softer front springs than the GT3 Cup. So it's got a much more forgiving and a much more positive front end. Actually, it will feel quite nimble on the front end compared to the Cup. You just sort of have to think about where to go rather than actually work out how to make it go where you want it to go.
And it's noticeable actually from what you mentioned earlier about the force feedback differences. This does feel like a wholly different car than the last one that we've just been out in.
And it's got the same, it's got all the good stuff and the sort of the difficulties with the Cup car have been ironed out. That's how I like to think of it. The good stuff is still there, so the traction's still brilliant.
But you can really stamp on the brakes in the corners, and she just comes to a dead stop.
Absolutely.
So, can we have a few fast facts about this car? Size, weight, all that good stuff.
I might have to come back to you on that. No, so size actually, it's about 50mm wider than the Cup car. Weight is, it's about 80 kilos lighter than the Cup car. Power comes in at this. Official Porsche figures are 500 horsepower, but it would be apparent that when we've done our balance of performance and stuff, it's got too much downforce to run at 500 horsepower, so it runs a little bit less actually. So that makes it quite sort of user friendly. Downforce is in the range of about 850 kilos of downforce at about 250 kilometers an hour. So that is a lot, heck of a lot. Top speed, it's geared. It will do about 285 kilometers an hour on the Nürburgring on the Nordschleife.
Nice.
And brakes, it's got pretty much the same brakes as the Cup car on it, so it stops well. It's got ABS though this time,
which makes a tremendous difference, and you can really feel traction control on this. I'm just in Sector 1, just come round first turn, and then that little left that comes back, going a little bit too hot, back end's kicked out, and then traction control kicks in, saves me, and it just, yeah, this is a very friendly car to drive. I can see this one being incredibly popular.
Yeah, absolutely, and another strange thing about this, well, a strange thing about this is that even though the springs and the way that it's sprung overall is a bit softer than the Cup car, the dampers are quite a lot harder, so it doesn't feel like it's rolling so much. It feels a lot more sort of settled and planted. It's quite a lot like a go-kart really. It's a nice easy car to drive.
And obviously being a GT3 and being the current generation GT3 as well, so it's a fairly new car, new this year I think, this particular model, is that right?
I think from my bit of research, it was actually last year that this came out, initially, but we are doing the 2017 version, what this is that we've got.
So how have Porsche been with you in terms of data and what kind of support they've given you to do this, which must be quite difficult for them to part with information with it being such, well, their current contender?
So one of the first things that we get supplied with is for the GT3 cars is the homologation papers. And that, for those that don't know, the FIA basically have a file on each of the cars that's allowed to race in the GT class. And it specifies everything from gear ratios to all the springs that they're allowed to use, to dimensions of the wing, to brake pad material, windscreen thickness, all that sort of thing. And basically that really helps us to build a picture. Porsche obviously supply all that information to make that file, and then when we get hold of it, we get all of the really important information, so we can really start to build a picture. In terms of actually sort of driver feedback, we've not had quite so much with this as we've had with the others, because basically this isn't really a common car. There aren't that many of them racing about, and those people that are driving them are you know, really big name drivers, which at some point I'm sure we'll get on board. But yeah, we've just sort of touched on it a little bit with them, but not really as much as we'd like to. But we're still very happy with how it is, absolutely.
And of course, you guys have got considerable experience with this specification of car anyway in GT3. I mean, God, I forget how many there is now, but it must be easily in double figures for GT3 cars in RaceRoom.
It's actually 18.
Whoa!
Last count.
I mean, that's incredible to see how far that's come, because that was quite an underrepresented class at one point. It seemed to be more touring car orientated, did RaceRoom racing experience. That's come a long way in a very short space of time. That must be quite a bit of pride for you, for a relatively small development studio like yourselves, to get so many seriously impressive licenses under your belt.
Yeah, absolutely, it really is. And that's just what you know about.
Yeah, I mean, is it exciting for you working?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's
working
really
on
exciting.
these different cars.
Yeah, really exciting. I mean, there's always something going off. It's really exciting. It's rewarding to, you know. For me personally, it's most rewarding when someone that really races it tries it and goes, yeah, you did a good job. So that's for me when I'm really like, know that my methods are working correctly.
That's it. You can't get a greater validation than that, can you? If someone comes in and says, yeah, that's giving you the experience that I'm getting in my car. And essentially that's why the vast majority of sim racers, I believe, sim race, because they want to feel, I want to know what it's like to thrash a 911 GT3 round big famous international tracks such as the one we're on at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's quite a thrill from our point of view. And actually, I'm going to move away slightly from RaceRoom and the Porsches just for a moment while I've got you. On sim racing in general, some people think we're in a golden age, some people prefer to focus on things that we don't have at the moment. But how do you've got real world experience, how do you think sim racing stacks up against the real deal? Can you get similar levels of satisfaction in a virtual car as you can in a real one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is really transferable now. There was a time when it felt really different. I mean, I think that I was busiest doing my racing when R Factor was relatively new, and R Factor, as it was put out, was, you know, just sort of the bones of something to build mods on, basically, really. And people hadn't really quite figured out how to do it properly, so the immersion wasn't quite there, and it was really, it was more of just a bit of a laugh and a bit of fun, and it wasn't really to be taken too seriously. But you know, that would be 10 years ago. In the last 10 years, it's come on absolutely leaps and bounds, and I mean, my job and my entire focus is making it as realistic as it possibly can be, and you know, with no compromise to that at all. So yeah, so I like to think really that I can keep myself sort of ready to go, and I like to feel like I could jump in a race car next week, and I've sort of warmed myself up by driving lots on this, and I know for a fact as well that a lot of guys that I know that run race teams and are currently racing and that sort of thing are really excited about these Porsches, because I mean, I've been tagged in posts on Facebook basically, really, about, you know, the Cayman and about and about the Cup car, so the expectation is really there. So I mean, we shall see, but I really think that the immersion massively is there.
So you think simulations now, just simulations in general, not sort of specifying which one in particular, are a genuinely useful tool for a young driver to learn the tricks of the trade when it's maybe not as easy or as possible to get genuine seat time behind the wheel?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that's been good for a very long time has been recreating circuits. The circuits have all, you know, for a few years now, been really representative of the real world thing. And you can definitely learn a circuit, it's no problem, but then actually learning this sort of characteristics of the cars and what to do and what not to do is really sort of where we're creeping towards getting that sort of right. I mean, the proof of it is really how many real-world drivers that we have in RaceRoom.
Yeah.
And little bits of feedback that we've had come through, like I know that in the past the TT Cup been tweaked because several of the drivers that have raced in the Cup over in Germany had said it's a little bit too oversteery. If you make it understeer a little bit more, we'll just be able to practice better, basically. So,
I mean, that's a good endorsement if ever there was one, isn't it?
And that happened maybe a year ago, something like that. But you know, when the guys had their, you know, sort of quiet winter, not racing, wanted to keep on top of racing, also racing with the guys that they race against in the real thing. And they basically came to us and said, if you just do this tweak, then you've got it right. So, yeah, the endorsement's there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a nice thing to hear, actually, because again, vast majority, this is not a. Okay, I speak for myself, but I dare say I speak for a good proportion of the community. We're not gamers. For me, there's a distinction between a gamer and a sim racer, and a gamer is someone who enjoys video games, whatever that might be, shooting, racing, football, whatever. They enjoy the escapism and the pleasure you get out of doing whatever it is that you're doing. And I think a sim racer, it is for me anyway, I sim race because circumstances don't allow me to do the real thing, unfortunately. So that drive for realism, the fine detail that a lot of people maybe don't care about or would gloss over and miss, it's critically important for me. And to know that if I can go out now, get a similar driving experience to what I've got doing this as a real car, and then maybe going into pits, making a change to the car and thinking in the real world that sort of change would translate to a similar behaviour, a similar characteristic as well. That's pretty magical, I think, to be honest, that.
Yeah, I mean, all in all, the setup changes that you can make and the driving techniques that you might employ in certain corners really do translate. So, for example, well, all of these Porsches, all of the spring rates, all of the dampers settings, wherever they're available, and the anti-roll bar rates are as the real thing. And as I said before, when we've had our driver one-to-one sessions, we've got them to up the damper or maybe change the anti-roll bar on the front. Just asked, is that right? Is that how it responds, or is that too much of a response? And we've dialed it in that way. So yeah, so you can definitely learn about car setup.
That's cool.
And driving techniques. A really interesting thing and an observation for me is that sim racing actually allows you to be and allows you to do more perfect laps that you'd be able to do in real life, and that's quite rewarding. You can feel sometimes real racing, leave a track after a race weekend sort of feeling like you left something out there, like you know that there's just another quarter of a second and you know that if you could just practice again tomorrow,
Yeah.
find it. But sim racing is magical because you can keep going, and you might know that if you just hook up that corner in that way, there's that extra tenth. And I mean, I've done it lots, that you can just drive them for 5 hours until you find that extra tenth of a second. And you can't do that for real. And that for me is quite special to be able to do that. But then also quite special because you can kind of figure things out and then go to the real track and try it.
Yeah, well, I'd say that's kind of what I'm kind of alluding to. That is potentially quite a valuable tool for a race team that's maybe running on a limited budget, or they're running a series that's got very limited allowance for track time. To be able to know that you can maybe go in there and know that that's going to overheat your tyres very quickly. Oh, hello, we're progressing to a race. It's a bit of a surprise, weren't expecting that. I'll remember this time as well, unlike last time, not to back out into pits, because that weren't very clever. In fact, we've got a warm-up, so we've got 9 minutes. Let's finish off for the last 9 minutes talking about this little beauty and what it took to bring it to the sim. So how long's this thing taken to realise in RaceRoom Racing Experience?
So let's talk about the process of how I did it, and I kind of go through the timeline as I did it. So it's probably taken something like 3 months, and it's been trickling away. In terms of starting point, this started life, physics of this started life as the Cup car, and then everything's been bolted on, as in the downforce has been added to it, and traction control has been turned on, and the ABS has been turned on. Suspension setup's been changed. So I mean, that might sound like it's something that's quite quick, but it's really not, because you end up with a car that's completely different. Yeah, so it's been sort of trickling away, and it's really been a case of having this and the Cup car, and they've both bounced off each other, and sort of what's happened to one and what's been learnt with one has been applied to the other. So it's been probably about 3 months for this, about 5 months for the Cup car.
I mean, that's a considerable investment of time, isn't it, to spend that amount of time on a single car when you've got the pressures of obviously producing content from the RaceRoom parent company, and new licenses being acquired feverishly by JF left, right and centre. It must be quite a pressured environment in which to work to keep producing cars to this level.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's 3 months at the same time that other stuff's happening. So, I mean, as I have said before, the pressure is really to get it right. The pressure isn't to get it finished. The pressure is to get it right. And we don't really pull the trigger, and we don't release anything until we're happy that it's how we want it to be. It's quite interesting for me just watching the cars on track, because just as you watch this GT3R going around, its whole attitude's really quite different. You can just see that front end bounce that the GT3 Cup has got, it isn't there, or it's not so significant, and you can see that the body doesn't roll so much. It's very pleasing for me to watch.
It's a very forgiving car to drive, without any shadow of a doubt. I mean, I talked about the GT3 Cup, saying that's got Online Classic written all over it, but I think this one as well, it feels like the kind of car that you can enjoy the experience of driving, but still promotes good, clean, close, hard racing as well. And perfect for some of the bigger tracks, the bigger Formula 1-esque tracks that we've got in RaceRoom at the moment. Malaysia and whatnot, that's the latest one that's come out. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, perfect for it. It's quite good over curbs as well. You notice, so you can bounce your way through, say, the Nordschleife or something like that. That's my personal favourite, actually. For most of the car tests, I like to really thrash it around there, and you generally find that if there's anything sort of odd going off with the car and it doesn't like one particular kind of corner, there's one of those sorts of corners somewhere on the Nordschleife. So you'll
find
the problem if you're sort of looking for it or not.
Well, down to the important question that everyone's no doubt waiting for. When's it coming out? When are we going to have them?
Well, it's definitely going to be before Christmas.
Remaining non-committal on that one then, fair enough.
I don't know, can I say? I do know, but people don't have to wait very long at all.
That'll do, we'll leave it at that then, we're not getting you in no trouble, that's fine, we'll leave it at that. Oh, I've just ruined my quali lap. Nightmare. I'm slow in these guys, the beta testers, just to give a quick shout out, by the way, to everybody who's joined us on server today. Thank you. That's much appreciated, and it hopefully makes for a slightly more entertaining stream than listening to Alex tell me things and me pretend to understand what he means. So yeah, thank you guys, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and most importantly of all, Alex, thank you for your thoughtful insights, as always.
Well, always thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries, man. As we were speaking briefly before we went on air, I'm going to commit you now. There'll be more of these coming for sure, and maybe even we'll have a look at some more specific sim/real-world driving featurettes going forward. Bit of housekeeping before we do go off air. Again, thank you everybody for tuning in. Please give us a like or a subscribe to our YouTube and Twitch and all of the social media channels. Likes make me happy. Thank you. Alex, I'm going to call it a day now, because we've
Absolutely, thank you very much for having me. Thanks for listening in, everyone, as well.
And just to say, this is a 3-car DLC pack coming out for RaceRoom in soon.
Soon.
So yeah, it's great fun. Really enjoyed it. You've made a really good difference here, Alex, I think, to what we see, what we feel out on track. And yeah, thank you. And that's all from us. We'll see you next time.
Superb.
Cheers, everybody.
All the best. Bye now.
Bye-bye.